And we are recording.
Okay, so I'd like to welcome everybody to this session on fostering academic integrity in the remote environment. My name is Mariela Tovar. I'm an academic associate at Teaching and Learning Services, and I am here with my colleagues, Naomi Burton McLeod, who is an online designer at Teaching and Learning Services, and Carolyn Samuel, who is also an academic associate at Teaching and Learning Services. So just to let you know how the session will proceed, we will have a short presentation that will be recorded, and then we will have time for questions and answers and exchange, and that part of the presentation will not be recorded. We will not be answering questions in the chat. Please, we encourage you to put questions in the chat, but we will be looking at them or answering them after the presentation. So with that in mind, we'd like to do a little check-in, and we'd like to do a poll with you and ask you a question about academic integrity. So Carolyn, if you want to launch the poll. Okay, so this is a question. So we have some answers coming in.
We've got about 10 more people who need to respond. Okay, numbers are going up.
Yes.
Okay, we've got almost everybody. Getting closer. Okay, we're at 43, 89% have responded, 91.
Yeah.
Okay, well, shall we close the poll in 3,
yes.
2,
yes.
1. There we go. I'm going to end the poll.
And let's share the results. Okay. So, okay, so that's interesting. So most people here agree with the idea that students want to learn generally honest about submitting their own work. Few people, 2% disagree, and some people are not sure. So Carolyn, can you move to the next slide? So that's encouraging, because some of the assumptions that we're going to, the assumptions that we're putting in front of you in terms of what we are going to suggest in this presentation are the idea of trust, which is basically that statement that you looked at in the poll. So the idea that most students are honest and they want to learn. And the idea also of trust being one of the values in academic integrity, that is a two-way communication. Trust from the part of the instructor in terms of providing some guidance to the students and being very clear about their assignments, and trust in front of the students in terms of committing themselves to do honest work. The other assumption that we like to put forward is that we can foster academic integrity with strategies that emphasize communication and learning. So by that we mean strategies that emphasize communicating to students, educating students, and assessment design. So next slide, please. So just to review our present environment, online proctoring or surveillance, McGill presently does not recommend the use of online proctored exams in the remote environment. There's few exceptions, including programs where accreditation requires that type of proctoring, or where it has been used before. And in this slide, we have indicated some of the reasons why There is a serious risk of technical failure. Those type of proctoring, they require a sustained extended use of internet, and that may not be available to students. And if something goes wrong, there is no alternative offered. The idea that it may increase in student anxiety and concerns about privacy, and concerns about accessibility, as students may not have the adequate laptops or the permission for the software installation. And also something that we are considering right now in all the design of our teaching, the time zone. So it's not feasible for students who are in a very different time zone. So next slide, please. So what can we do? So this is what we're proposing. We can communicate to students the value and expectations of our assessments. We can also educate students about what academic integrity is and why does it matter. And third, we can also design or adapt assessments in ways that foster academic integrity. So that will be the structure of our presentation. Next slide, please. So communicating to students, in many cases, you have very clear in your mind why you are doing certain assessments or why you're including certain content in your exams and so on. But the idea of transparency is an important idea in terms of communicating to students why each assignment or exam is valuable for their learning. Why is it important for academic integrity? It makes the assessment more meaningful. It relates the assessment to learning. And students, when they are on board with the assessment, they understand why they're being assessed, they understand why this is valuable, they're less likely to cheat, and also they are less likely to rush the assignment over. So they're more engaged. The other aspect of communication is the aspect of how each assignment will be assessed. As much as possible to share with students examples of assessments, so they have models of assessment, questions to consider, if you have a checklist that you use to assess the assignments and so on, to share that with the students so they understand what they're striving for. And then there's also the idea of how exams and assignments should be completed. This is particularly important in the context of open books or remote exams. So you can specify what type of sources you want the students to consult and so on and so forth, and how should the exam be taken. I just want to point out in terms of communication to students that these are good practices regardless of whether there is a remote environment or not. These are good practices to have in a face-to-face environment. They just happen to contribute to academic integrity as well. In terms of how exams and assignments should be completed, we have a tool at McGill that is exam cover page. It's a recommendation, it's not a McGill tool, it's being recommended in the literature, that you include with each assignment or an exam a cover page. What we have here, we have a TLS, we have put together a template of an exam cover page, which I'm gonna ask Carolyn to share with you right now. So you get an idea of what it looks like, but I like to emphasize that this is something that is, it's highly adaptable, it's a template. And what we have done is to indicate in yellow things that are changed depending on the guidelines of your faculty and so on. So I'm gonna ask Carolyn to slowly scroll down. So there is an introductory message. This is an opportunity that you can use to explain why you're including this assignment or so on. General information, this is mainly tailored for exams, but you can adapt it also for assignments. Terms and conditions where you specify, how the exam should be taken and so on. The exam time, the period and submission. Keep scrolling, Carolyn. The commitment to the exam, you know, whether once they start the exam, that's the time they have, or they have a longer period of time. And also, you know, things about the questions that arise during the exam period. What happens if, like in a normal face-to-face invigilation, students can raise their hands and ask a question or something, whether that's part of the exam protocol, but that's a way to have it in. And then, of course, a statement about academic integrity. So that's an example. It's available. You have the link in the slides, so you can consult that. So we can stop sharing and go back to the slides now. So that is in terms of communication. So let's see. Okay, so going back to the. So also I wanted to point out the reference that we cite in the slide. There's a whole literature about using transparency in assessment design. And this is a very, very good article in terms of giving you ideas of the type of things that you want to be clarified to your students with lots of examples. So highly recommended. Moving to the next point.
Sorry, Mariela, I'd like to interrupt for just a minute, please.
Sure.
For that article that you just mentioned, we should say that we do have a list of references that will be included with the slides. It's at the end, so we don't have the URL on this particular slide, but it is at the end of the presentation, and you will have the access to it from the URL at the end.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Okay, so moving to the next slide. So the idea of educating students about academic integrity, this is something that is not new. It has been promoted at McGill for many years, even before we went into the remote environment. The idea of bringing academic integrity to the forefront. So what is it in your discipline? Why is it important? What does it look like? So you can have a class discussion at the beginning of the course, renew the discussion, and so on. We do have very good materials at McGill that you can use, you can consult. And so this idea that, again, with the transparency, like what is it and why is it important? The other idea related to educating students about academic integrity is the idea of creating a course honor code, or at McGill it's called, I believe, Honesty Pledge, that you can post in my courses and revisit before major assignments and due dates. You can look in the academic integrity site at McGill to see what an honesty pledge looks like. But there is also examples of course honor codes that you can, they have been published in the literature, and I think we have some in the references. One of the things that has been recommended is if you have an opportunity to have students co-create the course honor code, that has been shown to be more likely for students to really adopt it and be on board with that. And last but not least, the idea of your liaison librarian is can really be a helpful source for student resources on citation and references practices in your discipline. So those are the recommendations that we have for educating students about academic integrity. And I believe we're moving now to the next section, which is, okay, yeah, okay. So we have also some references on the slide and some example of class honor codes. So we're moving now to the next section, and I'm going to hand it into Carolyn, who's going to be talking about designing and adapting assessment to foster academic integrity. Carolyn.
Thank you, Mariela. I think just before I go into this section, I'd like to come back for a minute to what you were saying about educating students about academic integrity and talking to them about assignment design and why we do the things we do and why we plan the way we plan. We did have a couple of questions. We had sent out a call for questions for this session, and we did get a couple of questions. They were from the languages departments, and they were saying that they're feeling challenged by the fact that we can't compel students to turn on their videos. And it's true, the university guideline is not to, we cannot force students to turn on their cameras for some very good reasons that are explained in the guidelines. But this might be a good opportunity to have a conversation with your students, not just in languages, but in all the courses, about why you might want them to have their cameras on for certain assessments. You might also want to talk about the challenges involved and sort of get students on board with why you want them to do that. I'm thinking specifically with respect to that language question, when we're communicating, we like to see the people we're talking to, and it's been challenging for many of us to see just sort of mosaics, you know, the tiles on our Zoom screens that have names or just blank spaces. So this would be an opportunity to talk to your students about the value of showing their faces if they can, but explaining why it would be helpful, because it has the potential for enhancing our ability to communicate. And that's just something to think about in the context specifically of languages, and it might encourage students to turn on their cameras if they're in a position to do so. So we'll go into this topic of designing and adapting assessments to foster academic integrity. And I think one thing, like one key point that we want to make is that we want to move away from the idea of one-to-one correspondence, in that if you did a 3-hour exam, maybe you're not going to do a 3-hour exam in the remote environment. Maybe you're going to do something different, or a combination of assignment types in lieu of that 3-hour exam. So we need to sort of broaden our horizons and think differently. We wanted to share this slide with the question, can we design in academic integrity? So this graph comes from a study that was done in Australia with students from 8 different universities, and they were interested in students' perceptions of the likelihood of contract cheating. And in this case, contract cheating was defined as students purchasing assignments from a third party or getting assignments from anybody. It could have been from a friend, it could have been from a family member, whoever it was, but actually getting assignments and using assignments that were not their own. I can't remember exactly how many students participated in the study. It was between 10 and 15,000 students. And here's what they found. So we've got the list of different assignment types here. And heavily weighted tasks, so assignments that accounted for a large portion of the grade, and short turnaround time, so assignments where students didn't have much time to prepare the assignment, those were cases where students were likely to engage in contract cheating. So with that in mind, let me just go. Actually, I did want to say something else before I go on. Dawson did a really interesting webinar on this. He talks about this study and also about other things related to assessment, and we've put the reference in the last slide that we'll share with you. But he also mentions in this webinar that he gives that he wanted to do a study with companies that offer online proctoring software. And he could not get any of the companies to participate in his study. So that's just an aside, that online proctoring software may not be the answer to everything with respect to academic integrity. And the fact that none of the companies who produced the software wanted to participate in a study was sort of telling. Okay, so we're going to look at how we can design academic, oops, sorry, went too far, academic integrity, or design for academic integrity. You might consider implementing, as we said, alternatives to high stakes assessments, and those might be frequent, small, low stakes assessments, such as weekly quizzes. Now, weekly quizzes can be done automatically in my courses. They can take different forms. They can be multiple choice questions, they can be short answer questions, they can be longer answer questions, but it's the idea of students keeping on track with their work on a regular basis. They could do bi-weekly journal submissions or reflections on readings. Again, the idea is they're on track regularly and they don't have to produce one big thing all at once. Regular portfolio contributions, students can document their work, their thinking processes over a semester. So what gets put into the portfolio can vary, but it might be drafts of the work they're doing throughout the semester. It could include reflections on their readings. So it's a compilation of what goes on throughout the semester. And then we have multi-stage assignments. So multi-stage assignments are, let's think in terms of a term paper that can be broken down, and you might have students submit an annotated bibliography before they get going on the full-blown writing. Students might submit a prospectus for their paper. They might submit a working thesis. They might submit an outline, and all of this can be done at different stages throughout the semester. So it compels students to document their processes, and you also get to help students along the way with your feedback. It could also be peer feedback. There might be some self-assessment or TA assessment along the way. But it's a way to provide students with feedback and help them produce better quality work by the end. So it's always incremental. So that's frequent, small, and low stakes assessments. You might want to keep your exams. That's okay. But you might need to adapt them for our current remote context. So these are some ways you might adapt the exams. You can consider putting in questions that require students to do analysis, synthesis, and application. So these are examples of higher order thinking. This would be in contrast to asking students to recall something from memory. It's not to say there isn't a place for that too, but we're talking now very much in the context of promoting academic integrity. And if you ask your students to do this rather higher level thinking, it might mitigate the problem of cheating. You might consider putting in a mix of closed and open-ended questions. And yeah, just that mix might be helpful. The open-ended might involve the analysis, synthesis, and application. Multiple versions of the exam. So if you have more than one version, you can randomize the questions. And you can also change questions. You know, you can, if you've got questions with numbers in them, you can use different numbers. If you have questions with place names or other proper names in them, you can change the place names just so that not every student is getting the exact same question. So multiple versions of exam, and in my courses, the capacity exists to do randomization of questions. Tasks that require students to incorporate resources. So you can have exams where students have to do some kind of research outside the fine constraints of the exam. And that's another way to call upon students to be a little bit more creative and resourceful with what they're doing. But you might also want to tell them what kinds of resources you are permitting them to consult for the exam. And this is, there are some examples in the exam cover page that Mariela showed you a few minutes ago. And you know, you can restrict it to their textbook, or you can tell them you can use your class notes, or you can say the whole internet is open to you. And modified questions from textbook or personal question bank. Again, it's the idea that's related to multiple versions of the exam. If you take questions from a textbook, and many textbooks do provide exam questions, maybe change a few things in them so that they're not identical, and students might have to do a little bit more thinking then. These are some other ideas that would apply to adapting exams and assignments. Have students address specific problems and audiences instead of generic topics. So with audiences, you know, I'm thinking about political science courses, you might have students write to different stakeholders in government, and you can assign students different stakeholders to write to. Applied personal experience, well, that sort of goes without saying. If students are writing about their own experience, that lessens the chance of plagiarizing. And then showing evidence of the evolution of ideas for large projects or essays, that can be done through a multi-stage assignment, for example, or through a portfolio. And it's the idea of documenting what goes on along the way and not waiting till the end of the course or midterm even, when students have a big piece of work that they need to do in a hurry. This way they can do things incrementally, build their knowledge, build their understanding, and then submit quality work of their own, either midterm or at the end. And then the idea of having a short oral presentation to defend their work. That's, it's like another way for students to indicate that they really did what they've submitted. And that can be done through orally in a live presentation, or it can be done through a recording. And then reflecting on the process of completing the assignment. So a personal reflection about what they experienced as they were doing the assignment. So these are just some different ways to do the adapting portion. We did want to say, though, that if you suspect plagiarism, McGill is looking into reinstating text matching software, and that's under review currently. We don't know yet if that's going to be in place for the fall. Some of you may recall that we used to have Turnitin. We are now looking at a different software program, and we'll keep the community posted as we get further information about that. And then if you actually have work that you think might have been plagiarized, the same reporting procedures are in place as existed before. And we've put the URLs on the slide for you, and you report the incident to the disciplinary officer in your unit, and the disciplinary office will take it from there. So there's absolutely no change to that. So now we'd like to ask you what strategies you've used to foster a spirit of academic integrity amongst your students. And as Mariela said at the beginning of the presentation, we wanted to record the presentation portion of this presentation, of this webinar or session, but we're going to turn the recording off in a minute for the discussion, because we're going to enter into a discussion now with you. And we also wanted to point out that this is perhaps a strategy you will want to use with your students. We do not want anybody to feel inhibited in the conversation. We don't want people to worry that what they're saying is going to be shared more broadly than in this session. And that is why we're going to turn off the recording. So I'm just going to do that now. I say that, and yet I'm just going to stop the recording. Okay, and